Lately, ancestor work has been coming back into our imagination in the Western world, and the ancestors couldn't be more delighted. Right now, we're in autumn, known as Samhain season in the Celtic Wheel of the Year. This is the time of the year in many different cultures where it becomes easier to speak to the ancestors, to communicate across the veil, and in the Celtic understanding, to access the other world. There's a lot of different kinds of ancestors to connect with, and in this video, I wanted to talk about one specific variety of ancestor that is eager to speak with you. I'm Asia Suler of One Willow Apothecaries, and this is your guide to communing with the deep ancestors. When it comes to ancestor work, many people are familiar with the concept of working with those in your lineage who you can name, who you can find on your family tree, or who are connected to you by name. Now, this is a beautiful way to go about ancestral work, and important healing can happen with this. And it can sometimes feel fraught if you have a challenging relationship with your family or to your family's history. For example, your family's histories as settlers or colonizers. This can feel challenging, like there's a lot to wade through and perhaps trauma to heal. One way to connect with your ancestry in a way that might feel a bit gentler, but still just as profound, is to connect to your deep ancestors. So who are the deep ancestors? This definition might change depending on where in the world you come from, but I consider the deep ancestors as those who lived before written history, those whose names likely have been lost with time, and those who come from a culture and a time where the environment that they lived in and the society that they lived in very much lived in harmony with the earth. So depending on where in the world your family hails from, this could be quite recent or it could be pretty far in the past. As someone of European descent, to me, my deep ancestors feel that they reside in the Neolithic or the Paleolithic. So both the Neolithic and the Paleolithic are considered to be prehistory because there's no written accounts of these times. We are mostly going off of artifacts and what we can deduce from archaeology. If you've ever heard of the concept of deep time, this is looking at the scale of Earth time in its grandiosity and its fullness, well, we can apply the same concept to the ancestors. We have deep ancestry. We tend to focus on just the last few hundred years, especially because that's what's normally recorded in our family trees. But your tree, the tree of your DNA and your ancestry, goes all the way back to the beginning. So if you wanted to, you could commune with deep ancestors 100,000 years ago, or if you'd like to commune with ancestors that are outside of the Homo sapiens species specifically, you could go back even further. I like to think as deep ancestors as those who live outside of the current systems that we live in. So these systems of capitalism, patriarchy, and the exploitation of the land. I want to commune with those who experienced a reality that is outside of what I was handed, a reality that is actually here to help us remember what it means to be human and how to move about the world. These deep ancestors have a perspective on life that we're really just remembering now, and they have so much to share with us. These deep ancestors lived in a paradigm that for some of us might even be hard to imagine now, but when we connect in with them, they can begin to share these mindsets with us, these ways of interacting with ourselves and the world, and profound gifts can come out of this connection. These deep ancestors in your lineage have very specific, powerful gifts to share with you. I believe that there's a wisdom that lives in our deep ancestry, and that wisdom is wanting to come to the surface again. Even 2,000 years ago, Taoist philosophers in China were already talking about the fact that their ancestors knew something and were aligned with the Tao in a way that had already been lost. So even 2,000 years ago, advanced cultures in the world were seeing that there was a way that their ancestors were operating in the world that was actually more in harmony with the earth and therefore more in harmony with their own Tao and the thread of their own soul. Through my explorations in connecting with the deep ancestors, I have seen time and time again that they deeply want to communicate with us. Not only are they invested in human beings flourishing and you flourishing as one of their lineage, but they're invested in human beings being able to be here on earth, being able to be in communion with this earth, to living in harmony. And so they want to be communicating with you and they want to help guide you, not only in your life, but in your ancestral work as a whole. They can be a sentinel on one end of the spectrum that can help you heal whatever trauma or hurt has happened in between. So I have a really interesting story of how I got into working with the deep ancestors. I was doing a series of pilgrimages to visit the countries and the lands that my family are from in Europe. And right before I went to England, I did a journey. So sometimes called shamanic journeys. I did a journey to connect with the ancestors there to say, I'm coming, I'm excited to meet you. And what was so interesting is in the journey, as I was drumming, I actually found myself going into a cave and coming out into this limestone cliff in what looked like southern France. Now, this was confusing to me. I had never been to southern France before. At the time, I didn't even know that there were limestone caves there, but I just had this feeling like this reminds me of something I've seen. Maybe it was southern France, but this definitely is not England. And as I moved through this landscape and in this journey, I met with people who said they were my ancestors who looked quite different than what I expected. They looked as if they were from Paleolithic times, the clothing that they were wearing, how they were traveling in a small band. And it was one of the most powerful journey experiences I ever had. And I remember they looked directly into my eyes and they said, "We are the ancestors we want you to connect with. This is your work." Of course, I still went to England and had an incredible time connecting with my matrilineal line there. But that encounter with the deep ancestors never left me. And it ended up becoming this torch for me to continue to do this ancestry work in an even deeper way. Now, what's really fascinating about this is right before I went to England, I did a genetic test to find out my DNA history. And while I was there, I got the test results back. And what is so interesting is that part of these test results was actually to look at my haplogroup. Your haplogroup traces your mitochondrial matrilineal DNA. So following your matrilineal line as far back as that specific variation can go. And I found out that I was haplogroup H, which a large majority of people of European descent are. But what's so amazing about this, as I was reading, is that haplogroup H can be traced back to the limestone caves and landscape of southern France in the Paleolithic. My mind was so blown by this. It's one thing to have an experience in a journey or meditation and feel like this was meaningful to me. Doesn't matter whether or not it's true, it really gave me something profound. It's another experience entirely to have that profundity and hold on to it and know that it's an important guide for you, and then to have this fascinating, interesting piece of your history come in to affirm this, that actually I did have ancestors living there, and what I was experiencing was not just a figment of my imagination, it was a true connection with my deep ancestors. The really cool thing about working with the deep ancestors is you don't need to know very many specifics at all about your heritage or your lineage. You can just ask to connect to an ancestor from the deep past who wants to work with you. And in fact, you might know countries that your family is from, but the deep ancestor who wants to work with you might have never been to that country. That might be further back than even your family established roots in a specific place. So be open to just who shows up and where you end up. So how do you start talking to your deep ancestors? Well, first of all, they want to talk to you. So once you open that door, you might end up finding that actually they're right there and they're going to start coming into your dreams, coming into synchronicities in your life, or just into ideas that seem to lead you forward. If you've never tried a shamanic journey, I think this is an incredible place to start. And I will put a link here to a video that I have all about how to undertake a journey. So you have guidance about how to do this. Any kind of meditation practice will also help you tune in. I find simple instruments like a flute or a drum, instruments that likely your ancestors did have access to, because we know that these are very ancient instruments in humankind, that can really help you tune in and sort of get into the flow. Or if you have particular music that to you helps you drop into the feeling sense of your deep ancestors, definitely play that music as well. Any kind of ancestral arts is also a direct way to communicate with your ancestors. So ancestral arts could be music or dancing, but it could also be crafts. For example, leatherworking, sewing, or molding clay. So all of these are ways to start talking to your deep ancestors. And I think as long as you go in with the intention to really connect to benevolent, wise, shining, intelligent deep ancestors, those who have wisdom to share with you, then you don't need to worry about who necessarily shows up. When you make that strong intention to connect to a guide who really has healing powers for you and your lineage as a whole, who shows up will be exactly who you need to speak to. This is a really powerful time of the year for doing this kind of work. Because the veil between the worlds is thin, it's just much easier to hear these messages, to receive communications and dreams. So your willingness to harness this time of the year will bring so much depth and so much profundity to these explorations. And if you'd like any support on this journey of connecting to your ancestors and this concept of the other world, then definitely check out my course, Herbs for the Other World. In the course, we talk about specific plants and practices that really help you to communicate across the veil, to harness this really special and powerful time of being able to work with the unseen realm and have the wisdom and guidance from that unseen realm stream into your life and uplift and support you as you move into your next step. So now I would love to hear from you. If you've started doing ancestor work or it's an established part of your practice, I would love to know, who do you talk to? Have you had a deep ancestor in the way that I describe it show up for you in your journeys or in your connections? And if so, what have you received from this relationship? So wherever your explorations take you this autumn, may the path be guided by those who love you beyond all reason, by your deep ancestors, by those who are here to guide and support you every step of the way.